Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Today is October 18th, 2017, 8 o'clock in the morning here on the West Coast, and we want to thank all of you and KEPW.org for carrying our show, and we really appreciate you listening. I don't want to waste a lot of time. I want to get right to this interview. We have with us Erika Dugan, who is from Oklahoma. And her family, she's trained as a journalist by trade. She had a small family that lived in a community that was exposed to elements of fracking. I'll let her tell her story. And I am so grateful she's willing to come on the air. Thank you, Erika, for sharing your story with us.
Yes. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah. So why don't you bring our listeners up to speed? What's happened to you since we last spoke? It's been about 2 months, I guess, 2.5 months.
Yeah, I think it was in August last time that we talked, and we live in a college community, but we're from the only other large city in Oklahoma. We're from the Tulsa area, and all of our family is there. We have a very large family on both sides, and we're very close with our family. We're not people who don't come to Christmas because we're mad at each other. We're people who can't wait to see each other, who love Christmas. We celebrate the time being together, and we just pack a house or, wherever it is we end up with all of our members, no matter what's going on in anyone's lives. So,
how extended of a family are you talking about? Like, how many people? What you talking about?
Well, my kids have like 20 cousins on each side.
Wow, nice.
So, yeah, so we're very close with all of them, and love over any differences and celebrate each other's differences, and so people make different choices in life, but we still come together and love each other through that. So,
nice.
So that's kind of how we are, and we're known as, our immediate family is known for being authentic and celebrating others, championing others, helping someone else when they're knocked down, and very ethical in our community. So,
what does your extended family think of the journey that you've been on, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, for them, they saw the changes in our children. They came to the hospital and scratched their head and said, what is going on here, and why aren't you figuring this out? So for many of them, they, know firsthand that these things really happened and that it was odd and that we were the matriarch and patriarchs in the family that had everybody over to swim in our pool. Our kids were well-adjusted and happy and social and active and in sport. So they knew it wasn't like some, weird mental process going on that was causing a physical process. They knew that something was just really odd. And then when it went from one child to the next child, and then to the child that was in utero, she was born struggling to breathe, it was something that made us all just beside ourselves, and we had to figure it out. And our physicians had to figure it out. And we went to a counselor early on with our first child, because sometimes you can have a mental illness that will manifest itself in different physical symptoms. So we early on went to a pediatric counselor that did testing on her and came to us and told us that something is wrong physically, and it is your duty as her parent to figure this out. If the state and the local doctors aren't paying enough attention to you, then it is your job to take the child out of state and figure out what is wrong. We left there being native Oklahomans, all of our big family here, seeing doctors that we knew in the community, doctors that we trusted, that we saw scratching their heads too and going, I'm just going to keep sending her to specialists until we figure something out. That was their plan. And, we would wait a few months and see if she just got better, and of course she didn't. And so we did the watch and wait thing. We did
and remind us again how old she was when all this was going on.
8 years old.
Aww.
And 8 years old, and she'd already been, to violate her privacy, she'd already been scoped at both ends, and, we were a family that was such a violation to us, that had to be done to our child in order to figure out what was going on. But we did have some findings from that later related to see that even our first child, it basically had burned a part of her colon, the water, that we didn't understand that was the process she was suffering that was going on. And, we didn't know. And even her teacher had brought it to us. We were noticing that she was having some problems digesting after eating, and she was not wanting to eat, and we didn't know what this was all about. And we'd be like, we try different foods, and we deal with the family going at family dinners. You just have to make her eat. Some kids, you just have to make them eat, and we deal with all that. And basically we came to find out that she actually had damage in a part of her colon. And when the hospital figured that out, they had already tried to set her up as like someone having anorexia, worried about her body image. And I was like, really? She's 8 years old. And she's the girl that goes on the playground and pays attention to the kids that everyone else is shunning. She doesn't care what anyone thinks of her. She swims in the swimming pool by herself. And the other girls are like, well, I came over to swim with her and she won't swim with me. And she's like doing her own thing. And you're going to, try to set her up with somebody. She doesn't care about her image. Yeah. And at the end of that hospitalization, we finally decided to do the upper and lower scopes on her to see if there was something actually physically wrong. And what they did was they did find something, and they didn't tell us, and they kicked us out of the hospital real quick and sent her home. And
what?
Just the process,
Still
and just
shocking.
The process, and this has continued to be a trend, honestly. But I don't know if in that, as I've looked back on this whole thing, I don't know if they knew there was a problem coming on in the water system and they didn't know what to do about it, or if I've come to learn how the health system has had to do things as they've had budget cuts from Medicare and Medicaid, which even though you're private insured, those cuts affect you because a majority of the patients in a hospital are publicly insured. So that affects the budget of the hospital overall. So that trickles down to you is what I've come to learn. But
how does it trickle down to you? If let's say 3/4 of the hospital is on Medicaid, Medicare, how does it affect a person who's not?
Because 3/4 of the hospital's operating budget is that other money that got cut. So then they have to find new ways to fund themselves.
Oh, okay.
And so say you built a new facility for, in this case, they had built a new facility for anorexia, and this person looks like they might fit the profile, and you figured out how you can get paid if you put them in that program.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Things like that can happen. And I've not been able to fully determine if that's what happened. And then they realized they had set that all up and we're going to get paid that way. But then they found these other findings and it messed up, all their work that she'd been in the hospital for a week. And she even had to have a feeding tube at this point because we had done everything outpatient for so long. And it was to the point where her teacher's like, oh, my gosh, she's hurting every day. Can you do something? And I had to go sit down with the physician and go, we've waited 6 months for this specialist. We waited 3 months for this specialist. We've done this. I have people coming to me telling me she's losing muscle. They're like, hey, I'm a athletic person, and I know, and it's not healthy when you start muscle wasting. Your child is losing muscle. I had her gymnastics instructor telling me something is hurting in her body when she does gymnastics. I am not comfortable with her being in my class anymore, hurting like this. I had all these people from the community going, and I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? I'm taking her to the doctor. I'm going to the specialist. I'm doing what they tell me to do, and they act like this is how it is supposed to be. So I finally had to, stand up and say, I think she's like dehydrated or something because she can't function, and I give her Gatorade, and she's better. And I had to, just a lay person, figure out, here's some things I'm doing for her, and come into my doctor and say, and then these are the things that the community members are telling me, and they're telling me to get another doctor, that you're lame, and can you help me figure out something? So I remember with that first child, it was the week of her Christmas party at school, how the elementary kids have like a Christmas party, and, that obviously was very important to my child. And he finally decided to just admit her and try to figure things out because we were putting a lot of pressure on him, I think. And so were the community members. And he lived in our community. So there was probably people coming up to him going, saying, what is your problem? And we knew his parents. And his parents were probably coming to him saying, you need to do something. What are you doing? So he probably had a lot of pressure, and a physician's not supposed to feel that. But there probably was a lot. So finally she got put in, and we had to tell her she couldn't go to school that day, and it was the day of her Christmas party. And she went to the hospital really mad, even though she is very physically sick. She's been losing muscle, but she was just a very strong-willed child. And she comes in, gets hospitalized, mad. Because she's like, what do you mean I have to go in the hospital? I'm going to miss my party.
Why couldn't they admit her one day later?
Well, because finally they did realize that things weren't in a good direction. And just because she was perseverant and able to remain ambulatory, and we were taking good care of, trying to make sure we kept her with enough nutrition as much as we could, but then they had to keep a diary, and she was only eating she wasn't eating very much, but she was still drinking. Well, we did find out she had also probably had a pneumonia that they're called, in my family we get these things called hydrating pneumonias, where they have a pneumonia that's there, but you can't see it until they start getting hydrated. So she was tough to work through that and try to go to school, but that's just how tough she was. And kids are perseverant, and they're tough, and she had been telling us forever how she didn't feel good. She had been telling us forever that she was hungry but it hurt to eat.
Oh.
So your kids tell you what's wrong, and you need someone that's really attuned enough to listen. But what's happened is our society got so confused over those generalized complaints, and there is more autism, there is more, other mental type conditions. So our society and the medical communities have kind of flipped, and well, when there's generalized things, and I don't want to do a lot of tests, and I can't do a lot of tests because the system's not letting me, then I'll just assume it's this, and we'll watch it and see if it turns into something more. And that's kind of where we were at. So
what do you mean by the system's not letting you? What does that mean when they say that to you?
Well, like if a doctor needs a test, they can't always order them.
Why? Why can't they?
Well, sometimes in children's case, they've decided those are more invasive and they really need to meet certain criteria before they do those invasive things. There's the problems with exposure to more and more radiation when you do certain tests. There's concerns for children now.
Yeah, there should be.
There's
that's stunning.
The actual cost, like it used to be. One thing I found out is that it is required in the state of Oklahoma to test children for lead, but we don't do it.
Huh?
So we don't do it, and it's like the way you would have a schedule for your shots.
Yeah.
There were certain tests that at some point were required, is what was released in basically a media article this past year when they had started talking more about environmental. And that is actually, I don't know if it's in the statute or what, because I'm not a lawyer, but there is some sort of rules that were set for that, and those rules have been just swept aside and violated.
Wow.
And those are some of the things, I guess that would be an example of how these things were decided, but then someone comes along and has concerns about it or is scared of what people might find these days or whatever, and those things just disappear. Or maybe it's the cost and those cuts that we're talking about and how those cuts end up affecting what tests you choose to do or not do. We have also seen through our own medical trials that I don't know if it's a bureaucrat or the insurance company or all of the above that are making our physicians capture certain things. Like, for instance, I was told by my cardiologist that I needed to have a device in my chest because of the problems that I was having with my heart. But certain things had to be captured in order for him to do that. So he wasn't allowed to do his job because there's a bureaucracy or an insurer or someone that does or doesn't want to pay. And like I said, that's that trickle down of you start with cutting. Medicare and Medicaid says, well, we're not going to pay for these things unless you have this. And then that trickles down. The insurance company says, well, we're not going to do that either then. Because we don't
This is really what, it's so outrageous. Imagine the difference in what we would know if we had single payer, if everybody could just go to the doctor. Like
I see that here. I don't know about other states, but I do see that here. We need that here because our doctors are so limited, so restricted, and they literally would have to, write a paper and fight for each person, and they're overwhelmed. They have more patients with more problems than they know what to do with, and and then
I bet in your state, especially after the fracking began, they're probably their increase in patients probably doubled at least. Well,
I was interested to find that the year my oldest daughter got so sick, and we had jumped through all those outpatient specialty hoops, and ended up having to hospitalize her. And she ended up having to have fluids. She ended up having to have a feeding tube stuck in her nose, which was quite traumatic for us as a family to see. But at the same time, we're glad someone's finally giving her help, you know. And then we ended up with those findings at the end of her hospitalization that I wasn't able to find for years later. So I ended up having to teach her how to eat again myself at home. But later, as I've reviewed all of this and I've gone through, I found that the year she got so sick, which was 2004, was also the year the New York Times came after and started attacking Oklahoma and started doing information on fracking. And what I see was them being free press and journalists, but what Oklahoma saw was the New York Times attacking them. So that's why I say it that way. But there was actually statements in the press that I found later that I was unaware of at the time because I was, you know, submerged in what was going on with my child and only reading the local papers and not paying so much attention to the national media because I was consumed in, you know, making sure my child stayed alive every day. But, and I was working on projects that were very feel good. Like, I was working on projects to increase the wildlife population in Oklahoma and keep it secured and raise, profits for that through art shows. So I was working on some kind of, you know, soft, fluffy, frilly things and wasn't paying attention to some of the hard news things that were going on, honestly, as a regular person. And didn't see where it affected me at the time. And come to find out, there's two statements that I've found to be very interesting and have made me wonder how that fits into the whole picture. Congressman, I think he's a congressman in Coburn, and Tom Coburn had made a statement trying to assure everyone he was a doctor in Oklahoma and this could not be affecting anyone's health because he knows, because he's in the federal establishment and he's also a doctor, and he would, you know, bet his professionalism on it that this was not affecting the health of our communities.
Wow.
And we've been doing it here in Oklahoma for a while, is what I believe it was Imhoff that said, Jim Imhoff, and excuse me. He said that, you know, we had been doing it here in Oklahoma for a while and no one was affected that way. And these were...
How do those people keep getting reelected in your state? People just believe them and love those guys, I guess.
Well, and the industry is very important to our state. It is, I guess it would be like some of the states that had mining as their sole industry, or like
again, I mean, but I'll tell you what, that's the thing. I mean, there's a really great film called Earth Rising, Earth Crying, and it's about the uranium mining. I think it is in North Dakota, South Dakota. It's about a little girl who was born really with grotesque birth defects. That mining town loves the uranium mining. And in fact, they love the fracking. They think it's really great for their community. And on the film, literally, there were some people that said, if the fracking was really bad for us, the government would tell us.
And I would be the person on that film that believed that. I believed in my agencies. Wow. I had known about an instance when I was younger that someone was exposed to, I think it was like a hepatitis type virus through a restaurant or something. And I knew about the response that the health department did for that family and made sure they were okay and all of that. So to me, the agencies do what they're supposed to do. And if there is a real problem, they take it on and clean it up and treat the people and make sure they're okay again. But something changed from the time I was a little girl in Oklahoma in the 80s and late 70s and 80s to this time. And I began to learn that. And then as we had our other child get sick, at one point I finally said, why are all my kids sick, to my physician, my physician, not my pediatrician, and said, what happened here? And I said, do you think I live on top of something poisonous? Did I make a mistake? Because I'd kind of run things down and figured out that, yeah, we've had some illnesses here and there in our first house in Tulsa, but when we moved to the suburb, to the nice big house with the sidewalks, and I said, is there something there I missed that I don't know about? Should I have done better research about where I was moving? I knew this development. I knew the developer. I knew it was a good area. It was like our dream home, and it gave our kids sidewalks, ponds, parks. We were just outside all the time. And how is it we went from, being in this neighborhood where I didn't feel safe for my kids to ride their bike in the driveway anymore, even though I'd grown up there too and it had changed, to moving out to this area where, of course, we were outside with our children, but I had a driveway that was like a racetrack. They could ride their bikes in a circle, and all the kids came over, and it was just this great outdoor fun that you're supposed to have, right? And back to that old feeling of the old days where you could run with your neighbors, and we would just watch over them to make sure they were safe from stranger harm. And how did we go from this to feeling that, everybody's sick, and what's happened? And he said, well, it can't be that your home was built on top of something unless it was built on an old nuclear site. So I thought you would like that part of the story.
That's interesting. But, he even brought it up.
And, just because we had a good relationship, and he had seen, he had seen the changes in my child, and he was concerned and what is going on. And just in good faith. And he said, no, it can be that. And I don't think he really knew. I don't think he knew that. And maybe my representatives and congressmen didn't know, really. Maybe they couldn't believe it. I think that might be, is that they couldn't believe that this could do this, that they couldn't believe it would interrupt the water table. And that was never really proven. It was just kind of like somebody's gut feeling, somebody's explanation, somebody's fear of what chemicals they're using, that they're putting in the ground.
But, to push back on them saying it was never proven, the reality is it has been proven, because that's what science does. It looks at the evidence. It doesn't look at your end assumptions first. You come up with a theory that says, hey, this fracking is affecting the water, and then you compare statistics. Everything, this is how we... Now, let me ask you this, Erika. Have you discovered if we have heard tell that they have used nuclear blast to blast out the fracking elements in there? That's one of their secret ingredients. Have you ever found out if that's true?
I haven't found out about that, but I can tell you I have been recently hooked up with a group that knows a lot of that. And I think I might be learning that in the future, and I'm learning more and more. And I have decided that my family's story is going to have to be a part of that narrative, because I see things changing. I see that all of these facts that we've accumulated through the years that have been science denied or whatever are coming together. And I see that that's growing into such a big body of evidence that we can all have hope. And I guess I wanted to say today that I feel that you having me on your show, even though we're probably not, reaching as many people as one would like. I think the people we have reached and the way you have allowed me to try to assemble my thoughts and assemble all this information that I've been dragging around for years through this journey, putting that all together, I guess I need to say that you've empowered me to find different ways to learn more and join up with people who know more and start really putting my own evidence together to prove that the narrative that came to be and that grew and changed, that started from that first child who we just couldn't get better, of course was always true, but now it's, it's the whole truth, because what we've seen in our country and our communities, the science denying thing that you talk about, it's really just a game to try to make different sorts of truth to keep away the real truth. But as working in law, and as I've come to learn studying, trying to figure out what all laws are being broken and how I'm being violated, that's just part of the game, and that there is no such thing as versions of truth. There's only one truth. And so I feel that we're going to come to a place where there's only one truth, and that's going to finally be dealt with. And why has it been a game? Why have they done this to us? Why have they violated our laws? Because it's an ugly truth, I guess, like the perfect name that Al Gore used. I never understood why the heck he did that, but to me it's making sense, because it needs a lot of help. It needs a lot of resources. It is mind-boggling. It is a problem that is just huge to deal with. For instance, there is a story right now that's out that I feel like it's on KFOR News in Oklahoma. It's a TV station, is where I found it. And I was shocked when that story came out, because we talked a little bit outside of the show about fake news and blocked news.
Yeah.
I would call this story new news. What it finally did, after years and years and years, there is a Superfund site in Oklahoma that's considered, I've heard it's one of the worst Superfund sites in the nation. I've heard it's just the worst in the state. I don't know what the actual truth is about that. But basically, they finally did a story on the health of that site. Those types of stories have been reserved for little YouTube videos.
Yeah, well, what city is this in where they did this?
Pitcher is the city that's most known. It's Picher. And Tar Creek is the actual Superfund site name. But the story on KFOR just ran in the past couple weeks, and it relates to human health, and it even said, finally, how the groundwater could be contaminated.
Wow.
From the Superfund site, how the runoff, which runoff has been debated by environmental seekers for a long time, and that's not been admitted. So they even admitted how the runoff from the site has gotten into the groundwater and leached into other area communities, which doesn't keep it, isolated to that. I can also tell you that my city, before 2004, when my child got sick, before that, started purchasing the water, or shortly after. I don't know the exact window. I guess that's still up for discovery if we ever end up being able to get in a courtroom with all of this. But at some point, they started purchasing water from a town it's Pryor, Oklahoma, which would be south of that site. But come to find out there was holes all in the infrastructure. They call it the delivery system. It's a system that brings the water from one area to another. They purchased the water from this company that's called UWA, Oklahoma Ordnance Works Authority, I think is what that stands for, if you want to look any of that up. And it's interesting. UWA has its own mining history, so that's kind of interesting, too, since I know you've done a lot on that and had a lot of people on your show about that. So I know that's why you and I keep talking, because even though you're focused on nuclear and all of that, we do see how all of these things kind of come together and go back.
That's true. This is why I've come to understand that myself in the last 2.5 years since I've been doing this, is that you can't really separate them. The policies that allowed the oversight to be lax and missing is identical to the same. And I actually do believe that, especially in the fracking industry, I've heard tell, now this is something I haven't been able to confirm because Dick Cheney had these secret ingredients sealed. No one can tell what's in there. But I have read some articles that say that they do use nuclear contaminants to blow up. That's part of what they use in their underground explosions, is nuclear waste to help expand the explosions, which makes sense. It's a use of the waste that they think they can use if you're thinking like that, But again, I haven't had somebody on here saying, yes, we know that's true. That just to find that answer is a little bit of research. Just that one topic, you have to be pretty dedicated to it.
Well, and there's a lot of dots to connect, is what we're learning here. And they do connect. Completely. And it's not a conspiracy. It's just a line that really the dots connect. And
this is the thing. The longer they deny it, the easier it is to connect the dots.
I guess so. And the more truth that comes out, the more research that we have groups of people doing, going, this is abnormal. Our ancestors didn't have these problems. These illnesses aren't in our family. They're getting to be in our family, but they weren't. And, as more people question that and more people look and test, like in our case, we ended up finding gas leaks that weren't being remedied by our utility companies when we asked. And then we ended up finding the growth of that. And then our home insurance came in and tested and found we had chemicals in our water that were worse than the gas leaks we were concerned about. So for us, we had that data. It's not like I just sat there in the beginning. At one point I questioned and said, why are all 3 of my kids doing this now? Wow. And he's like, well, the youngest one kind of got better for a while, but it would have to be a nuclear site like we talked about, and then we just kind of blew it off. And that was just a question, but then it escaped, and we thought, what else is it? There's so many more details in that timeline, so many more things that we found that experts have looked at everything on a legal front, on a medical front, on an environmental front, and they all come back to these 2 chemicals were what harmed our family the most. And those chemicals are used to clean the water of bad chemicals that the system knew were getting in, that they knew they needed to get out. But those things weren't disclosed to us right to know. And I don't know how those right-to-know laws really work in my state, but I know they really work well in other states. But we, those rules were played with in my state, and we didn't know that we were giving our children water that could have had runoff from a Superfund site, that could have had hydraulic fracturing because this delivery system went through those areas and had holes all in line, and they knew they were losing water. And they were concerned about that they were paying price per gallon for the water they were buying.
Wow.
And they were losing it out the holes. But then I didn't hear ever why don't you go find those holes and patch them? Is that cheaper than what we're spending per gallon that we're losing? Does it accumulate over time? And go find the holes and patch them is what my logic told me as just an objective, logical person looking at this like a journalist. Well, if you know there's holes, why do you just keep running the stuff through it, And but then my husband brought out, well, if stuff's getting out, what's getting in?
Right, exactly. That's exactly right.
So,
and what else are they not testing for? Like, I just did a quick search for this Superfund site that you mentioned, Tar Creek, right? I mean, they say that they tested the children. This is what it says very quickly. This was once the world's largest source of lead and zinc. It's where half of the metal of the military used for bullets in World War I was produced. Production stopped by the 1970s, leaving behind 300 miles of caverns, dangerous dust, 300 miles, and red toxic water that bubbles into a critical watershed. Blood tests showed that a share of local children had elevated lead levels, and hundreds took out buyouts. But frankly, all they tested was for lead, not nuclear contamination. And when you bring up the mining, you do bring up nuclear contamination. That's one of the heavy toxins. So it's
right.
This is why we have a high level of diabetes, I believe, because diabetes, Dr. John Goffman showed that diabetes is directly one of the first outcomes of being exposed to low-level radioactivity on an ongoing basis. Is diabetes is immediately a factor.
Well, and the two chemicals we were exposed to, bromodichloromethane and chloroform, are those agents that are used where, our agencies decided that these would be good to, they're a byproduct of cleaning the water is what we were told. But now we're being told here in 2017 that those are specifically used to remove chemicals they think are coming from fracking sites, is what we were told by a public interest law school that looked at all of our documents.
Wow.
So,
so now let's fast forward. Here you are 10 years later, 13 years later. Have your children been healed? Are you getting a better response from the medical industry? Are things easier for your family now?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Actually, no. Actually, they're worse. Because we have spoke out more. Yeah, because we have spoke out more, and we have been like, we know that our truth is true. If we were confused early on or thinking that our home insurance company was trying to blame it on the city so that they didn't have to pay for our house or whatever, now we're sure. Now we're sure that we know, and it all is, and it's very concerning the way that our insurance, our government, and our medical industry, and this is what you're seeing with all the complaints about Affordable Care not working, blah, blah, blah. That's code for they're changing the way they do business with us as patients. And it's going back to that, cutting of costs. And you need to prove this in order to get that. Or, if you have these problems, we're just going to go ahead and lump it in diabetes because now we're taking on diabetes as an epidemic. And so there's, I guess, some sort of money for that. But, there's all of that going on. But as I've learned more and more and started to speak out, been on your show, I wouldn't say I've gotten better care or more care. I've actually gotten less care. In March, I have been treated with IG therapy for the defect in my immune system that has occurred that comes from my bone marrow that can't heal itself.
Wow.
And so at one point, all three of my children were on that as well. And it basically is when people go and donate plasma, they take the plasma and take those plasma cells and they give me those healthy people's antibodies so that I can not get, a cold and die from it. basically, or not get a certain type of infection and die from it. I don't make antibodies. They don't come from my bone marrow. My bone marrow won't heal, is what all the experts have said. Your only choice would be to do a bone marrow transplant, and they save that for when you're, very critically ill, and there's no other choices, because a bone marrow transplant is not a good viable thing to do. And there are, risk and dangers. It would be like saying, okay, because you've had 2 episodes of heart problems, we're going to give you a heart transplant. No, they wouldn't do that, right? Maybe you could see that. They would just. So the IG therapy is my mitigation for my immune system, the way someone else's blood pressure medicine would be for their blood pressure. Instead of getting a heart transplant, you would get blood pressure medicine, right? So it's kind of to help you see the difference there, and that how it might be a little similar. And basically the insurance company has taken that away from my 2 youngest children before. My youngest child got to the point where she was in respiratory stress with a ongoing pneumonia that wasn't meeting the criteria. It didn't have the fevers, so they wouldn't treat it.
Wow.
And she was just, going to expire with respiratory distress and her oxygen level being in the 70s. I had to get a ENT I knew to admit her, because the emergency room wouldn't even admit her because she didn't meet those fever criteria and all that, even though her blood work was in what they call metabolic acidosis and all that, but they didn't admit her. And so even EMTALA laws weren't working for me, is my point. We fought, got that medicine back, but here again in March, my insurance company sent a letter to the specialty pharmacy and I had been on the therapy, and they hadn't broken my therapy from 2010 to 2017. But that letter broke my therapy, and it took it back away from my child again, my youngest child. She got...
What did they say? What do you mean they took it away? They sent a letter to the pharmacy and said, we're not paying for this?
No, we've already been through all that, and we've found ways around that.
Oh, okay.
We've found ways to beat that. Yeah, we've been through that a number of times, and we found ways to beat that. The pharmacy helped us find ways to beat that. And this was their way of making... Basically what they did is they made it where we couldn't see the doctor anymore. And the doctor couldn't write our prescription anymore. So then they sent a letter to the pharmacy and said, even though they have, this many months left on their prescription, they need to get a new doctor, and they haven't got one. And they blocked us where we can't get one in our state. And so we went out of state. We went to Washington University. We found, and I think I talked about this a little bit before, but I didn't tell you who it was. But this time I'm going to tell you who it was, because they've sent me a mail fraud letter is what it is, actually. So,
what?
Yeah, a mail fraud letter. And basically we went to Washington University in Missouri, and we have a multi-state insurance plan that allows us to go out of state. We set up care with... We had letters from our daughter's pediatrician that said she absolutely was in dire need of an immediate immunologist to care for her. She needed a pediatric rheumatologist as well. Well, lo and behold, we found one that was both. And we went to see her, and we were blocked by a fellow who tried to proceed in telling us, she wasn't in clinic that day. I was going to have to see him. And, we recorded this. We had a witness.
Wow.
And it was ugly. It was terrible. We didn't get to see her. I went to the administration. We finally got to see her. We said, we need her medication continued. She's like, and we even offered to relocate to the area if that was what we needed to do for our child. And it was just, I guess, to make a long story short, all I can say, it was a fight, and it was rather ugly.
Erika, why do you think they're
support.
fighting you? Why this constant battery of pushing back against just giving you medical care?
Well, what I've done in my legal research is I've found that this doesn't just happen to us.
Mm-hmm.
This is something when they don't want to pay, and they basically, this is a way of doing business, and someone who maybe has a workers' comp claim that the state's not taking care of them and they take it to a lawyer might experience this too. It happens in different arenas, not just in ours, but basically we have been injured by someone, and that has become very apparent and very clear. And so they don't see why they have to pay for it but they're not going to say that either. It's just the way they do business. So they're going to fight us and put up different obstacles, minimize things, lose documents, lose records. That's what
See, I think this is at the heart. This is precisely at the heart of why healthcare is not a free market. Healthcare is not a, quote, business. It is a human right. It's like saying you don't have a right to water. You know what I mean? It's outrageous. I mean, if we had a system where people could just go to the doctor and get well, the doctors would band together and put an end to it, because if everybody went to them who was sick, and the other thing is these doctors also don't keep track. There's no data gathering. There's no way for them to really, the reason that we found out about Flint was because a doctor had the audacity to keep track of what happened with her patients. And she was able to verify.
And we do have a doctor that tried to do that for us, and this is the doctor that we aren't able to see anymore.
And that's probably why you're not
able to give us our medication.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And she, I think, has been, I know she's been retaliated against in the way the insurance company took back any payments they ever paid her for us.
No way.
Yeah. Yes, way. Those are the things that are going on. But worse, I know we're talking a long time on this one, but worse, long story short, my child in the first part of September, I got sick with something, my son got sick with something, and she eventually got sick. And they took her IG therapy away, but I was able to get permission from the new physician that we saw in Missouri that it was okay for me to keep giving her the extra that I had in the fridge from when my blood pressure had been too high. And that it legally would be okay for me to give that to her because she does have a prescription, and she was agreeing that she still should have a prescription, but I had given it to her at a lower dose, so she was a little bit protected, but not all the way protected, but it wasn't enough, is what I'm telling you. She had some infection called Citrobacter that in a normal person supposedly would have been okay. But in her it wasn't. It attacked her kidneys and made her arms swell up to the point that I'd never seen anything like that before.
Oh
and this was just in September, a couple of months ago. And
what did you do for it? What ended up happening?
Well, I gave her what they call supportive care, because I do have a medical-centered home, a patient-centered home, and I watched her breathing to see if she needed breathing treatment.
Apple cider vinegar. I'm going to tell you, apple cider vinegar 3 or 4 times a day. Over the summer, I had very severe edema because my kidneys are so weak. When I got sick, I looked it up online, and it actually seriously helped. Like 3 to 4 times a day, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar will reduce. And it also, if you soak a cloth in apple cider vinegar and wrap the affected area, the edema affected area, it actually relieves the pain in the arm or wherever it is. That's just my aside. I'm just going to give you my own empirical knowledge, because I'm sort of a AMA resistor. I don't trust the AMA other than to diagnose personally. I really am one of those. I don't trust the and this is why your story is exactly why I don't trust the AMA, because they look at us as assets. Say in my Erika, I'm starting to get anxious here. We only have 5 minutes left. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I hope you'll consider coming back very soon, sooner than 3 months than it's been, because I find your story very, very, very compelling. And I think you're the reason I love to interview you is you're very thoughtful and careful with your words. Extremely, in my view, contemporary and establishment. Like, this kind of shocked you. You were a trained journalist, and your own personal experience with your doctors, your children, I think that it has taken you aback and helped you, made you understand things a little bit better. So I'd love to have you come back on the air.
Sure. So basically, Lonnie, she had a vasculitis. I did have to get her hospitalized.
Wow.
It did take going to 2 hospitals again. She had a lot of blood and protein in her urine by the time they admitted her.
Wow.
No matter that all the things, I had done Epsom salt baths. I had done everything, all kinds of, homeopathic things, made her teas, done everything that I could do, and nothing was touching it. It was just that critical, that life-threatening, and very scary. And I have to understand, this child has had probably getting close to 30 cases of pneumonia in her life.
Oh my gosh.
For me, and only like 5 or 6 of those now were treated in a hospital. So who treated the rest of them? That would be me. So, with, of course, supportive care from doctors. I'm not saying I'm over a doctor or anything, but I'm saying, I'm the one that did the breathing treatments at home that the doctor prescribed me, and with support from my husband and sometimes my other children or a grandparent when I was too exhausted. But so I'm saying, for this to be that scary, it was very scary. It was one of the scariest things we've been through. And to not be admitted on that first round and to get a letter from the ER doctor telling me I had to find her an immunologist and a rheumatologist fast in 2 days was just even more scary. And then finally having to find my way to some doctor that I knew and asking him to help me, and him seeing that she was critical and him being able to find privileges because she was critical, and then being admitted, and then being piecemealed things and having to ask certain questions to learn what was going on. It was just, it was a lot. And then when she was discharged, they won't allow her to have the specialist follow her in Oklahoma that she needs to have follow her. So I'm still looking for the proper care for her, and I'm watching her start to have swelling again. I will try your apple cider vinegar just for the heck of it. But
I'm telling you, it really worked. What happened was I got pneumonia over the summer, and I happened to have weak kidneys. So I read this book. My daughter sent me a book called Primal Panacea by Dr. Levy, who believes you can cure cardiovascular disease with vitamin C therapy. And in the book, he recommended 200 milligrams per pound that you weigh. So I was taking mega doses of vitamin C when I got for pneumonia. So I took a lot of, like 40,000 milligrams of vitamin C for three days. It got rid of my pneumonia, and I kept taking high doses of vitamin C. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And I took too much, and my feet swelled up really bad. Oh man, we're out of time. Well, Erika, I hope you'll join us. Put your courage feet on, you guys. We'll talk soon.